Hi class, it's Mrs. Cutler here. I am so excited to be with you because tonight is the night we get to finish the book that we've been reading for quite some time now, Among the Hidden. This is the first book in the series, and we are going to read chapter 30 tonight, which is our last chapter. Before we get started, though, I have to share something with you. Last night I told you that I had been working on a sewing project, and I've been sewing some masks for some healthcare workers and people that needed them. And I have worked on the pattern and kind of perfected it, and I wanted to show you the mask that I made. A friend came over the other night. She was just walking her dogs, and we stood outside and chatted, but she was so excited as she loves bees, and she said, "Oh, that's the cutest thing ever." So this was adapted from a pattern that farmers used when they would work in the fields around the dust, like from grass seed and that kind of thing. That used to be my summer job. I would help load trucks. So it comes up on the nose really well. And what I've used is 100% cotton fabric. And then inside is this interesting like interfacing type fabric that is a non-woven, and it doesn't let small particles through. So it's breathable, but if you were to put water on it, it just kind of beads up. And then you use basically like tin. You cut a little strip of tin, like from one of those pie tins, flat on the bottom, and I sewed it into the nose. So when I put it on, I can fit it up tight around my nose. So let me show you how it works. This comes up around here, and it simply goes around my ears, and voila, I've got my mask on. So I actually had to go buy dog food for my dog today, and I wore this when I went in the store, and then I had yellow rubber gloves on, so I was so matching. But I was able to get in and get my dog food and get home safely. So anyway, that is the mask. One of the masks that I've been making. I decided to color code them, so I'm making different sizes. This is a size for like a teenager or a woman, and the one that I make for men, I will do it in a different fabric, so they'll be all color coded for sizes. All right, so here we go. This is chapter 30, the very end of the book. Lee Grant settled into the car that would take him away from the farm, where he'd found refuge after running away from home. He'd gotten lost. He'd certainly never intended to end up here. He surveyed the dusty barnyard in front of him, the ugly ruts of dried mud where tractors and trucks had left their tracks. He stared at the ramshackle barn and the peeling paint on the weathered house, sights that should have been entirely foreign to him, but weren't. Luke gulped, unable to keep thinking in his new identity quite yet. It was too soon, too hard, when his shoulders still felt the warmth of Mother's last hug. He looked down at his hands, clenched together in his lap, and they already seemed like someone else's against the background of his crisp new trousers. No more ragged blue jeans and hand-me-down flannel shirts for him. He had a whole suitcase in the trunk full of some kind of fancy barren clothes he'd laughed at all those months ago. He didn't care about the clothes, but he wished they'd let him keep his name at least. Yet Jen's father had been proud that he'd gotten to keep the same initials. "A rush job like this? It's a wonder you're not stuck with Alfonso Exarix," he'd bragged in the letter that he dropped off the night before, pretending he was just coming to ask Luke's parents to cut back a willow tree that drooped over the Talbots' land. The Lee Grant was a baron. He had died in a skiing accident just the night before. His parents wanted nothing to do with Luke. Too painful, Jen's father had explained. But they had agreed to donate their son's name and identity card the way people had once donated hearts and kidneys. Some secret group had helped third children arrange it. The group also had agreed to pay for Luke to go to a private school as a boarder year-round. Supposedly, he was transferring in during the middle of the term as punishment for running away. He'd read about such places in the old books in the attic. It seemed a strange way to live without family, but he was just as glad not to have to pretend to love another set of parents. Now Luke looked back to his family's porch where Mother and Dad and Matthew and Mark were standing and already waving. Dad and Matthew looked gruff, and Mark merely looked serious. Strange enough for him, but tears were streaming down Mother's face. She'd cried too, the night Luke had told his parents everything. He'd started with his first visit to Jen's house, and Mother had immediately scolded, "Oh, Luke, how could you? The danger! Oh, I know you're lonely, but honey, promise you'd never, ever..." "That's not all," Luke said. He told the rest of the story without looking at her until he reached the end and his decision to get the fake ID. Then the sound of her sobbing made it impossible to avoid looking. She was red-eyed, devastated. "Luke, no, you can't," she gasped. "Don't you know how we'd miss you?" "But Mother, I don't want to go," Luke said. "It's just that I have to. I can't spend the rest of my life hiding in that attic. What will happen when you and Dad can't take care of me anymore?" "Oh, Matthew and Mark will," she replied. "But I don't want to be a burden on them. I want to do something with my life. Figure out ways to help other third children, to make..." All the things he thought of sounded too childish to explain in the face of Mother's sobbing. So he finished weakly, "Make a difference in the world." "I'm not saying that you can never do that," she answered, "but that's years away. We'll figure out some way to get a fake ID for you when you've grown up, somehow." She turned to Luke's father. "Tell him, Harlan." Dad sighed heavily. The boy's right. He needs to go now, or if he can. Luke could tell his father's words came out painfully, but they still stabbed at him. Maybe part of him had been secretly hoping his parents would forbid him to go, would lock him in the attic, and keep him their little boy forever. "I've checked around some, quiet-like, to see if anyone's heard of a third child getting to live a normal life. Around here, they can't," Dad said. "Far as I can tell, he's not going to get another chance." Luke turned back to his mother because it was too painful to look at Dad while he was saying that. But the pain twisting Mother's face was worse. "Then I guess we don't have a choice," she'd murmured. That had been 2 days ago, and ever since then, she'd called in sick to work, and she stayed home, spending every second with Luke. They'd played board games and cards, and she'd interrupted every move with, "Oh, do you remember?" or "I remember the time..." The coups he'd made as a baby, his first steps, his delight in discovering dirt, the spring he was 2, the first time he'd hoed a straight row in the garden, the zucchini he'd grown as long as his arm, the bedtime stories and the tuck-ins. She was filling him up with memories, he knew, for the times when he'd have no one to talk to about his childhood. But it was hard to listen. He wished they could just move their Monopoly pieces and pretend the time wasn't ticking away. But all too soon, this morning had come. Jen's dad had pulled up in his fancy car and sprang out to shake hands with Luke's parents. "Mr. Garner, Mrs. Garner, thank you very much for reporting this boy's arrival immediately. From what I can hear, the Grants were worried sick." He turned to Luke. "Young man, what you did was irresponsible and reckless. The only smart thing you did was to remember to take your ID card. I guess you must have heard that the population police shoot first and ask questions later." He clapped Luke on the back, and he slid his hand down to slip something into Luke's pocket. Luke reached down to touch the stiff edge of the ID card. His ID card. "Do you have to start pretending already?" Luke's mother whispered, the tears beginning in her eyes. Jen's dad was shaking his head sternly and patting his chest, as if to say something was in a hidden pocket. "But," he mouthed. When Luke's parents nodded to show they understood, he stopped patting, and he pulled out an official-looking paper. "Ah, here they are, your travel papers. Your parents are sending you to Hendricks School for Boys, and if you don't shape up..." Jen's dad gave him a stern look that somehow also conveyed his sympathy. Mother cleared her throat. "Would it be all right if we gave him a goodbye hug? We've gotten kind of fond of him in the time that he's been here." Jen's father nodded, and then both parents held him tight and released him. "Be a good boy now, you hear?" Mother said. Luke could tell she was trying to make it jokey, the way she might talk to some other mother's runaway son. But for the life of him, he couldn't come back with a joking response. He only nodded, blinking hard. And then he stumbled to the car and he tried to be Lee. Jen's dad circled the car and slid into the driver's side. He started the car and pulled away. "You're just lucky you're getting such a highly paid chauffeur," he said. "If I weren't a personal friend of your father's cousin..." Luke wasn't sure if there was a hidden message in the words or if Jen's dad was talking for the sake of the bug. He decided he couldn't analyze it yet. He peered back at his frantically waving family until they were out of sight. Soon the car was passing the other side of the barn and the field beyond, views Luke had never seen, though he'd lived there his entire life without being within 100 yards of them. In spite of the fear gnawing in his stomach and the anguish of missing his family, already he'd felt the thrill of excitement. There was so much to see. He'd have to tell Jen. The grief he'd been avoiding for days welled over him again. But I'm doing this for you too, Jen, he whispered, too softly for Jen's dad or the bug to hear it over the car's hum. Someday, when we're all free, all the third children, I'll tell everyone about you. They'll erect statues of you and name holidays after you. It wasn't much, but it made him feel better. A little. Luke stared back at his family's farm as long as he could. He could just see the roof of Jen's house beyond the sparse line of trees. And then, in no time at all, it seemed, everything familiar disappeared over the horizon. Lee Grant turned around to see what lay ahead. The end. That's the end of our book, Among the Hidden. So I don't know about you guys, but boy, I love this book. I think it's fantastic. All kinds of cliffhangers going on there. And we'll be starting the new book here tomorrow or maybe next week. So you can go ahead and take the AR test on the book if you'd like. Remember, it's Margaret Haddix, Peterson Haddix is the name of the author. You can look it up and take an AR test on it. All right, so until next time, we'll be starting our new book. And tomorrow I'd like to share an Easter craft with you that I'm working on. So until next time, I'll see you later, guys. Bye.